Now we have our keynote speaker, Dr. downtown from New Jersey. He was one of the pioneers of the movement in the United States when in his youth. Now we're all old men. In his youth, he was the leading force to challenge the decision by the U.S. Senate to return Diaoyutai to Japan, a mistake. So he led the delegation along with the Dr. Wu Zhongxiang and both young professors at the time. And Dr. Xiang is a genius, the Chinese version of Einstein. Dr. Xiang was a young 22-year-old full professor at Yale University at the time. And Dr. Tao was a leading firebrand and leading the force and blocked the decision in the US Senate with a mere 300 people at the time of the Diaoyutai movement. Now today, everybody here in the United States, Canada, and throughout China, and all behind this movement. And even China announced the special zone. So now the air rights, the sovereignty returned to China as a result after 44 years of struggle. So let's congratulate Dr. Downtown and listen to his remark. Thank you.
First of all, I think Ding Yuan exaggerated too much a lot. I only play a very small role, so I don't know where he got that story, but he's very good at making up stories. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the conference organizers for inviting me to be the keynote speaker at today's meeting. On the one hand, I'm very honored to do that, but on the other hand, I'm concerned that I may not meet your expectations, but I'll give it my best try. Before I talk about today's topic, I would like to tell you a story. It's about a famous physics and astrophysics professor who was universally recognized as the premier scientist of his time. He was constantly being invited to give talks all over the world on many topics such as the origin and the evolution of the universe, how our Earth and our solar systems were formed, the ultimate fate of the universe, the fundamental forces of nature, the consistencies and inconsistency of the Bible and science. So he was widely recruited by famous universities all over the world to be their chair professor. Finally, he chose a prestigious university in New York, New Jersey area. Since the professor is not very fond of flying, he chose as part of his condition to agreeing to come to the university, he wanted to have a chauffeur full-time. So over the next 2-3 years after he went to the university, he went to many places to give talks. Since he lived in New York, New Jersey area, there are a lot of colleges and universities around that area within a few hours driving distance. So he was constantly being driven in that private car by a chauffeur. After hearing many such talks, the chauffeur one day said to the professor, "I've heard you giving this talk so many times. I can almost give the talk myself. Do you mind that one day when we go to a university that you have not gone there before, that I give the talk and you sit in the back of the room like a chauffeur?" And the professor is a playful professor, so he thought, that may be a good idea, so why don't we do that? So a few weeks later, the professor was invited to go to a university he has never gone before, so most of the people may not know him personally, at least has never met him personally. So they switched roles. Since the chauffeur is about the same age, about the same height, so it wasn't too difficult. With a little bit of makeup, a little bit of change of clothes, the chauffeur actually looked like the professor, and the professor looked like a chauffeur. So when they went to that place, the chauffeur went to the front and gave the talk, and the professor sat in the back of the room with like a chauffeur. And this is a smart chauffeur, even though he's just a chauffeur, but he's very intelligent. So he gave a talk, brilliant talk, since he had heard it so many times before. And since he has heard many of the questions and answers before, he was able to handle the Q&A also. Until a very young person asked him a very penetrating question. And he thought for a while. He was stuck. He couldn't figure out the answer. He was just about ready to give up and admit that he was the chauffeur and not the professor. But as I said, this chauffeur is a very smart person. So all of a sudden, a light lit up in his mind, in his brain. And he said, this is such an easy question. I'm going to ask my chauffeur in the back of the room to answer the question for me. Unfortunately, today, I don't have a chauffeur in the back of the room, unless you call Sang-Jin Chang as my chauffeur. And he's a physics professor also. Okay, now let's be serious about today's topic, which is the opportunities and challenges in preserving the true history of the Sino-Japanese War in the 21st century. First of all, I think that this topic is actually broader than the words in the title may imply on the surface. It's not just a matter of finding out what really happened in Asia during World War II. Let me explain. I think deep down in their hearts, most of the historians who have investigated this issue know what happened during the Second World War in Asia. But however, for various reasons, mostly political, they are not willing, well often, they are not willing to speak and write about what truly happened. Because that may adversely affect their career and their research funding opportunities. So when you couple that with the Western mass media, which reflects the positions of their governments, the end result is that the true history of World War II in Asia is almost never taught in high school. And most Westerners, including high school history teachers, world history teachers, know very little or even nothing about that part of World War II history. And whatever little they know may be false, or may be partially false, or may be distorted. And it's not just that the students don't know, these teachers of world history also don't know. And I'm not just speculating on this, we know as a fact because we have talked to many, many such teachers. Therefore, the topic of preserving the true history of the Sino-Japanese War is very much related to the state of the West-China relationship, especially the U.S.-China relationship. Beginning shortly after the end of World War II, because of the possibility of the Chinese Communist Party winning the Civil War in China, the West-China relationship, especially the U.S.-China relationship, has not been good. For more than 65 years, with the possible exception of a few years of the Nixon visit to China, the U.S. policy toward China has been to surround, isolate, and weaken China. As China became stronger from both the economic and military perspective, especially during the last 5-10 years, so that now China is the world's second largest economy. As a matter of fact, if you take into the buying power, difference in buying power, China, according to the United Nations in early this year, actually is the world's #1 economy. So since that time, for all these years, especially more recently, the United States has adopted a very antagonistic policy toward China and has recruited countries like Japan, Vietnam, Philippines to serve as her frontline pawns to implement her antagonistic policy. There are many things that one can point to for reaching the above conclusion. Due to the shortage of time, I'm just going to mention a few examples. Shortly after the end of the World War II, the United States did not prosecute any of the Japanese scientists, doctors, or leaders who led Japan's deadly, inhumane, and massive biological and chemical warfare. Why? It was in exchange for getting their knowledge and data associated with developing those weapons of mass destruction. This has been documented in several books and articles, including those by American medical historians. Unfortunately, it's not a well-known fact to the American public. The United States likes to use double standards. On August 28, 2013, United States Secretary of State John Kerry said, the use of chemical weapons in attacks on civilians in Syria last week was undeniable, and that the Obama administration will hold the Syrian government accountable for moral obscenity that has shocked the world's conscience. But on a much more massive use of biological and chemical weapons that Japan unleashed on China during World War II, do we hear Kerry or Obama mentioning moral obscenity? The United States also decided not to prosecute Emperor Hirohito, even though he was a hands-on emperor who was fully aware of and approved what Japan did during the war. If the emperor of Japan did not do anything wrong, then that helps the Japanese people to feel that their country also did not do anything wrong. And Japan was the victim instead of the aggressor. Therefore, Japan does not need to acknowledge and apologize for the so-called atrocities of World War II. On December 25th, 1953, sort of as a Christmas present, the United States had no right at all to decide unilaterally to include the Bellew Islands as part of the Ryukyu Islands, whose administrative rights would be handed over to Japan in 1972. This complicity by the United States helped to create a dispute which should not have existed in the first place. Furthermore, especially in the last few years, the United States has on many occasions stated an internally inconsistent foreign policy. On the one hand, the United States says that she doesn't take a position regarding the territorial sovereignty of these islands. On the other hand, she says that these islands are covered under the US-Japan Mutual Defense Treaty. In other words, the United States is willing to go to war in Asia that has no moral or legal reason to be involved unless the reason is to weaken China at all costs. Another example of the United States' antagonistic policy to weaken China is her deep involvement recently, from early on in the recent protests in Hong Kong. The United States was directly and deeply involved in seeding, planning, creating, and supporting the recent protests and chaos in Hong Kong, as have been reported repeatedly by Tony Catalucci, an independent American geopolitical analyst based in Thailand. This is not to say that there are not legitimate social concerns by the citizens of Hong Kong, but the protest that China is not following the 1997 agreement is establishing Hong Kong as a special administrative region of China is a focus of. One could argue that China should do more to improve the welfare of the people of Hong Kong, but why does the protest have to take the form of actions that violate the laws of Hong Kong? Especially taking into consideration that these actions would have been suppressed immediately and with force during the 150 years of colonial rule under Great Britain. Such actions are also unlawful and would not be allowed in the United States. So why is the United States sitting, mentoring, and supporting actions on the internal issue of China, except that it's part of the United States policy to weaken China? Let us consider an analogy. How would the United States government feel and the American people feel if the Chinese government was involved in sitting, mentoring, planning, organizing, and supporting an Occupy Wall Street protest? This is just the most recent example of the United States interfering in the internal affairs of China as an attempt to weaken China. More discussion on this particular antagonistic policy toward China can be found in the recent book, Target China, How Washington and Wall Street Plan to Cage the Asian Dragon by William Endall. The reconstruction of Japan after World War II was completely under the control of the United States. If the United States had wanted Japan to acknowledge and apologize for the massive and inhumane atrocities that the Japanese military inflicted all over Asia, the United States could have easily persuaded Japan to do that. But it did not, even after almost 70 years have elapsed since the end of World War II. Again, why? The only explanation is that the United States wants to use Japan as a partner and a major frontline pawn to surround, isolate, and weaken China. When an established champion athlete faces stiff competition from a new emerging challenger, what does the athlete do? The established athlete will look within himself or herself and his team, her team, to examine carefully every aspect of himself or herself and their team, training and physical and mental preparation in order to improve the performance. Similarly, now that the United States is facing stiff competition from China as the world's #1 economy, she should look within herself for ways to improve the country as a whole, instead of trying to sabotage China. Let me give you an analogy in sports to illustrate this. Is the United States behaving like Tonya Harding when she tried to beat the competition from Nancy Kerrigan in the 1994 figure skating competition by conspiring to try to break Nancy Kerrigan's right leg? Let us now discuss the opportunities and challenges of preserving the true history of World War II in the 21st century. Thank you. In the 21st century, most of us in this room as Chinese Americans or Chinese Canadians living in the United States and Canada. Because we are bicultural and our roots were in China, to a large extent, we are ideally suited to accomplish this objective. We care for and love our mother country, but if we also care for and love our adopted country, the country where most of us are citizens, and where our children and grandchildren most likely are living or will live. We know the history and culture of both countries. Many of the elderly among us have personally experienced the Sino-Japanese War. Most of our parents and grandparents have suffered through the Sino-Japanese War. Based on our own and our parents' grandparents' recollections, we can bear witness to what transpired during the Sino-Japanese War, and no one can deny the authenticity of what we or our parents' grandparents experienced. Furthermore, we are in a good position to assess the positives and the negatives of each society, both societies, then and now. Therefore, organizing the GA Global Alliance for Preserving the History of World War II in Asia and Alpha, Alliance for Learning and Preserving the History of World War II in Asia, are in the best position to spearhead the movement to preserve the true history of the Sino-Japanese War in the 21st century. However, those factors that give rise to opportunities for us are also the factors that make it difficult for us or create challenge for us. Because most of us are Chinese descent. Sometimes it makes it more difficult to persuade Westerners that what we are saying reflects the truth and our analysis is objective. Because they may think that we are biased toward China. This is especially difficult and sensitive if the issue involves criticizing the United States for its complicity, as in the case of preserving the true issue of Sino-Japanese War. Let me offer you another analogy. When we see that our children are doing something wrong, we don't hesitate much to point out or criticize the mistakes of our children or grandchildren. But however, if someone outside of our immediate family criticizes our children or grandchildren, we may feel offended and become defensive for our children and grandchildren. Because of the complicity and involvement of the United States, it makes it doubly difficult for us to achieve our objective. However, we are not going to give up. We just have to work harder and smarter, have a longer-term perspective. How then should we attack this problem? First, our activities must not only target Chinese Americans or Chinese Canadians, but the Americans and the Canadian public at large. As a matter of fact, our primary target audience should be the American and the Canadian public. Furthermore, we must have patience and commit to long-term struggle, because the buy-in by Westerners to this cause will take time to develop. At first, they participate because they see the injustice of sweeping that kind of atrocities under the rug. As they learn more about that part of history, they may understand better why certain things happen or why certain things have not happened. They may be able to correlate the actions of their own governments to the developments involving this issue. As their understanding deepens, they will see that the complicity of their own governments is contributing obstacles to the cause they support. And the American and Canadian public may then take actions to ratify that situation. This takes foresight and courage and takes time. That's why we feel such a loss with the recent passing of Dr. Pete Stanley, a former president and pillar of Global Alliance. What we really need to do, among other things, for each of the R4TA organizations is that we should develop or recruit more people like Pete Stanley. So each of our organizations should try to recruit at least one before next year. Let me make it very clear. When the Americans see that our government's actions are detrimental to the welfare of the American people and also to world peace, when those actions are not consistent with the American values we so proudly proclaim, then criticizing our government is the right thing to do, and it's also a patriotic thing to do. Similar remarks apply to the Canadians. As we previously mentioned, that the Western leaders and Western mass media have been purposely dragging their feet in setting the record accurately on the true history of Sino-Japanese War and have been adopting an antagonistic policy toward China. Consequently, the Western public has not been getting information that are based on facts and analysis that are objective. Today, many people find a lot of their information via the web, in particular via Wikipedia. Therefore, one of our efforts should be to set up a task force to facilitate the writing and submission of articles to Wikipedia, relevant articles on this part of history and related history. Not only that, we can be the authors of some of these articles, but we should also explain the process and facilitate others who are not familiar with the process to make it easier for them to write and submit. If you do this properly on a big scale, then it could have a tremendous impact on raising the knowledge base of the Western public and also the Chinese American and Chinese Canadian public as well. I think many people have thought about this issue. For example, I heard from Ying Chang almost a year ago, and more recently from several people in the Bellew group. There's a large group, which Gilbert Chang actually is one of the people in charge of that Bellew email group. When GA and Alpha organizes our programs, like the annual Peace and Reconciliation Study Tour, Asia Study Tour, which types of professionals should we focus on? We should continue to do what we have been doing during the past 10 years. That is, help to educate high school world history teachers and other educators, and to a smaller extent, also colleges and middle schools. The goal is that these educators will incorporate this part of history in their world history classes, in the curriculum. And through them, they can teach the students and also the public at large. This way, the teachers can help to increase the knowledge base. And the teachers should also be encouraged to reach out to the public at large. For example, by presenting talks at libraries and other community programs, writing articles for magazines, posting articles or comments in websites, and submitting letters to the editors. We also do not necessarily have to restrict the world history teachers. Our experience in the last few years has shown that other professionals can also contribute in a major way, such as filmmakers, lawyers, English teachers, journalists, public officials, etc. We need to form alliances of collaboration with more groups. Identify these alliances and collaborations should be long-term. Ideally, these alliances and collaborations should be long-term. But short-term alliances and collaboration can also be beneficial. We do not necessarily have to find groups whose objectives are identical to ours. As long as our objectives overlap and their short-term benefits, then we join forces and jointly sponsor certain programs. Based on our own experience, we have done this on many occasions with several types of people and groups, such as World War II study centers in colleges, Holocaust centers or commissions, book clubs, libraries, college Asia student associations, established Chinatown corporations, cultural associations, etc. As mentioned previously, we want to reach the American public or Canadian public audience. So it's important that these alliances and collaborations are not just with Chinese Americans or Chinese Canadian organizations. A group that should be of special benefits to join forces with is the Korean American and Korean Canadian organizations. They are very organized and have made headways with elected public officials and have done pioneer work in the comfort woman issue. For example, the first comfort woman plaque was installed in 2010 in the city of Borough of Palisades Park in New Jersey. It was approved by the City Council of Palisades Park, whose population is 51.5% Korean ancestry. It has both the highest Korean American density and percentage of any municipality in the United States. When the Japanese government, including a personal visit by the Japanese Consul General in New York, failed to persuade them to change their mind while dangling economic incentives for the borough, it was reported by the New York Times. As a result, the whole world knew about it. And as a result, you see comfort woman plaques and statues being erected in many parts of the United States and other parts of the world. The most recent one is Glendale near Los Angeles. An alliance collaboration with Korean Americans will broaden our base from a Chinese American and Chinese Canadian base to an Asian American and Asian Canadian base. We should also foster opportunities to form alliances and collaboration with Japanese, both inside and outside Japan. They are righteous and courageous Japanese who recognize the injustices of Japanese Imperial Army, working to preserve the truth about that part of history. Let me just mention two such heroic Japanese, Tamaki Masuoka and Naoka Jin, who have dedicated their lives to use primary sources to preserve that part of history. We have emphasized that the complicity of Western governments, especially the United States government, has created many obstacles to achieving our objective. Therefore, we must be much more involved in the American political system, similarly with the Canadian political system. Even though Chinese Americans and Korean Americans make up only 1.23% respectively and 0.55% respectively of the American population, their percentages in certain congressional districts in certain states such as California and Washington could be significantly higher, as we mentioned a particular borough in New Jersey for Korean Americans. One of more influential Congress representative, especially a senior member of a key congressional committee, could be very influential. Their views will be much less likely to remain unreported by the mass media, and their letters to editors will be much more likely to be published. As many of us know, our letters to editors are almost never published. In the United States, there's an organization called Committee of 100, which is a group of prominent Chinese Americans with a mission to pool their strengths and experience to address important issues concerning the Chinese American community, as well as issues affecting Sino-American relations. We need to reach out and interact more with the Committee of 100 because they could be influential, have good contacts, and could provide financial resources. Similarly, we should reach out and interact more with other similar organizations. The political atmosphere in the United States in the last few years is very much anti-China. Constantly, we hear negative remarks by American political leaders and negative coverage by American newspapers, television, and radio. These negative remarks are often not true and biased, but they are getting more and more and worse and worse. In spite of what President Obama said after the APEC conference, let's take a look at his actions, not his words. What's achieved? Such atmosphere is not conducive at all in preserving the history of Sino-Japanese War, and more importantly to world peace. Such atmospheres poisons the relationship between the two countries. That means the most to us in this room, United States or Canada and China. It could even lead to war between the United States and China. Furthermore, the consequences in the future will be very grave for Chinese Americans, especially for our children and grandchildren. We are not crying wolf because there's no sight of the wolf anywhere. We are crying wolf because the wolf is just around the corner. Let us also address the China side. Although China does have many social and political issues that need to be addressed, they are not the originator or the cause of the problems between the United States and China, especially on the issue of preserving the history, the true history of the Sino-Japanese War. China, of course, can play a key role on this issue. However, because most of us are US in this room, are US citizens or Canadian citizens, and we are living in the United States and Canada, we do not have much influence over how China is run. Nevertheless, we urge China, besides paying attention on improving her economy and military strength, we urge they should also put more attention on improving her soft power. In areas such as the human spirit, the motivation guiding one's livelihood and behavior, the caring of fellow men, the reduction in the gap between the rich and the poor, the non-abuse of power, and clearly defining and following rules and regulations, etc. These are similar to the ideas discussed by Professor Donald Chang, Jiang Dongcai, of the University of Science and Technology of Hong Kong in his just published Chinese book, 道德战争，现代中国在价值观上的挑战。The English title is Moral War. Unfortunately, you cannot buy it in the United States. You have to buy it from China. And I just ordered 10 copies. 10 copies were coming to my house. I actually have a copy, but I did not bring it today. It's in Xiao Jin's house. By significantly increasing her soft power, China will be more successful in winning the hearts and minds of the Chinese people and people all over the world. In closing, we reiterate that the task of preserving the true history of Sino-Japanese War is not just reaching an academic agreement on what happened, but intertwines closely with the U.S.-China relationship. The complicity of the U.S. government has created many obstacles and has made the task much more difficult. We must remove those obstacles and keep the United States from creating more obstacles. Our being bicultural, have a good understanding of the history of China and the United States, provides opportunities to try to solve that problem. However, as discussed earlier, those factors that give rise to opportunities for us are also the factors that make it difficult or create challenges for us. We discussed several steps that we must take, including our primary target audience should be the American and Canadian public. Set up a task force to write or facilitate others to write and submit articles about that part of history, as well as related subjects, to public websites like Wikipedia. Help educate teachers and other professionals about this part of World War II history, who in turn educate the students and the public at large. Form alliances or collaborations with other groups inside the Chinese American community or Chinese Canadian community. Because this is not just a Chinese American and Chinese Canadian issue, form alliances or collaboration with other groups outside the community to create a broader united front. In particular, seek collaborations and opportunities with suitable American organizations. Another group is the Korean American community, as well as those courageous Japanese who have dedicated their lives to preserving this part of history. Involve much more in American and Canadian political systems. If we are successful in selectively targeting certain political offices, our voice cannot be so easily be dismissed. Reach out and interact more with the Committee of 100 and similar groups so that their prestige, influence, and resources can be utilized for our cause. We must fight with all resources to counter the anti-China, anti-Japanese political atmosphere that currently exists in the minds, words, and actions of Western political leaders and their collaborative mass media. It's important to recognize that criticizing the U.S. government for its erroneous and dangerous policy is both patriotic and the right thing to do as American citizens. We care for and love our adopted country, and we want the United States to be a successful and prosperous country, a country where our children and grandchildren live and will live. We also need to encourage China to put more emphasis on improving her soft power. The task of preserving the true history of Sino-Japanese War is important, but it's even much more important than that because it's related to Sino-US relations and world peace. Furthermore, the quality and the livelihood of our children and grandchildren depends crucially on how successful we carry out this task. We know that's a very difficult fight, but we should not shy from it. Instead, we should double our efforts and take it on with all the strengths that we can muster. I want to end this talk by repeating a quote from Iris Chan, who said, "Please believe in the power of one. One person can make an enormous difference in the world. One person, actually one idea, can start a war or end one, or support an entire power structure. One discovery can cure a disease or spawn new technology to benefit or annihilate the human race. You as just one individual can change millions of lives. Think big. Do not limit your vision and do not ever compromise your dreams or ideas. As a matter of fact, about 150 years ago, we have an example of the power of one. In 1868, Ensign Burlingame, the American ambassador to China, and later on China's ambassador to the Western powers, including the United States, almost single-handedly got the Burlingame Treaty signed between the United States and China. That was the first equal treaty between China and any Western power. Unfortunately, due to his early death in 1870 at age 49, there was no lasting impact from the treaty. Later in this conference, you'll hear more about Ensign Burlingame from David Chai. And I just want to mention another example. On the flight from Newark to San Francisco yesterday, I saw a short documentary with the title, Waiting for Mamu, M-A-M-U. It's about a Nepalese in Nepal woman who dedicated her life to care for young children whose parents are in jail. And in Nepalese laws, when your parents are in jail, your children also go to jail. So these children are actually rescued from jail. So she has housed about 40 of them and got them educated and so on. So she can educate 40. And then these children most likely will become, maybe not as great as her, but will do similar things. And they will educate many others. When you go through this 3 or 4 generations, you can be talking about tens of thousands of people. So for her effort, for the power of one, for her effort, CNN has a program called CNN Heroes. She was recognized as CNN Hero on 2012. So one of the prizes is $300,000. So she used that to build a permanent house for her children. And you can actually go to YouTube, just look for Waiting for Mamu, M-A-M-U. You can see a trailer and find out more information. My last remark is that each one of us may be only one person, but together we can start a movement that can overcome huge odds and change history. Thank you.
曹博士是典型的中国的仁人君子，非常谦恭学问很好，可是非常低调Dr. Tao is a typical gentleman of the lost generation. He's very humble and polite. I have the privilege to working with many gentlemen like him and the late Dr. Peter Stanek and many of the global lines key players, because it has been necessary for me to work with such firebrand and also strategic mind activists, yet they are very effective. And I go out to offend people and they go to apologize. And so we build a team. Anyway, we have a very good team fighters. Dr. Tao and many of us have the same problem today, because every time we mention Iris, we couldn't speak. Every time we mention Dr. Peter Stanek, we choke. That's because they are our globalized heroes. Iris promoted the concept of power of one, and that is so true. Every one of us can be a source of power, and we build the power center. And after 25 years, now, this morning, our Canadian leader, Tekla Led, sent out an article from New York Times early this morning middle of the night, I believe it's 12 o'clock, first released a editorial talking about what's wrong with Japan, why Central Abbey is determined to revert history and deny the issue of conflict women again. So our effort didn't go in vain. And also, the Global Lines now today have a very small handful of people here, but this conference is live broadcast in China at noon today. And also, the recording of this conference will be incorporated into the documentary and released before the anniversary of Nanjing Massacre in December. And our message will go back to China and translate into 9 different languages broadcast worldwide. We have not only Chinese Americans, Chinese Canadians, we have the leaders from across the United States and Canada, and we also have the big brain power behind the Jewish cases and the defender of the Holocaust victims, attorney Barry Fisher, he just arrived. And at noon, we have the Korean activists arrive. We have our friends from the Netherlands represent the Dutch victims in the Pacific. And we also have doing a little commercial break here. The gift from our friends in Hong Kong. And this is for the defense of Diaoyutai. And they couldn't be here because they are in the middle of a big protest. So they sent bags. So feel free to pick up the bag and take home. Remember our friends in Hong Kong. And when you are sending out Christmas cards, don't forget, put a little sticker outside the envelope. Don't buy product in Japan. No Japan, unless there's an apology.